Alright, so can you classify the images in this picture?
So you mean images or not background images?
Well, images or background images. Any. And tell me which one it is.
The icon in the top right corner.
Okay, is it an image or a background image?
Image. Got
Yeah.
an image.
Okay.
Wait, did you say both of them?
Which one is it?
Do you click it or not?
Would you click these?
Oh.
You won't click them, but would you want other people to?
Yes, I want to.
Okay, then they are. Okay.
Awkward.
Anyone else?
The get icon buttons are images.
Yeah, the get icon is an image.
That wood thing is a background image.
Yeah, the wood stuff. This is the background image.
So like the whole background for the page, you got the S gradient in the bottom.
Yeah, that's a background image.
I call that top left.
Yeah, these little,
Oh, no, top left.
these?
Very
Top
top
left.
left.
Oh, these? Yeah,
Yeah,
these are
they're really
images. Yeah. Okay, so. Cool. Anyway, so where do we get these images? What you do is you basically build your website design in Photoshop. So you kind of, this is Alex's website. So you can kind of see like, he built this entire thing in Photoshop. He drew out what he wants it to look like. And what you do is you kind of slice out the parts of the website that you want. You slice out the parts of the website and you make them into individual pictures. Okay, and then you put these individual pictures on your website and you display them through HTML, CSS. And so in this, you would have to identify which one's a background image and which one's an image. So you save them accordingly, and then in your HTML, CSS, you put them as images, or you put them as background images. All right? So how you do this is you use the crop tool, and what you do with the crop tool is basically you take out parts of your website. Basically, for this button, you would crop out this part of the button, and you make that one image, and then because these buttons are clickable, so you crop out these parts, and then you would crop out like a cross section of this background to make it a background image. Right? So you're basically like dissecting your website. And the crop tool is right there on the bar, on the left. It looks like a.
Are there so many different versions of all the buttons that are popping out? Is it like different hover?
Yeah, he's making hover styles here. So if you go to the actual website, sometimes they're like, yeah. So when you want to have different versions of a button, and they're not easy to do, which is like changing the color like CSS, you want to make different versions of the actual button, and then you use either CSS or JavaScript to swap them out when that event occurs.
Any other questions? Okay. So how we use background images in practice is we basically don't make an entire image. We kind of need to think about how much data you're transferring, right? Because if you transfer this giant image when you don't need to, you're wasting a lot of time, and it takes extra time for the page to load. So in this picture, there's a background image for this top part, which is like a repeating gradient. So you can kind of see that. You can kind of see that this part repeats. So you don't need to copy this entire top part. You only need to copy a small cross section and just make it repeat with CSS all the way across. Okay. What other parts you would crop out are probably like this little thing here that makes it look nicer, and this is probably a background image because triangles can't be made from pure HTML and CSS. You kind of have to make it an image. So and it's not important to the content of the website, so it's a background image. And these are search buttons. So you have multiple instances of your icons, so you don't make a special icon for each one. You just take one of them and you just duplicate it across. All right? So we're going to identify slices. How can you make this button, like how do you think what's this minimum amount of slices that you can make this button and make it look exactly the same with HTML, CSS? Like identify the slices in this image. Slices are basically cut up this image and make it look exactly the same. cut up this image in portions. If I could cut up this image in portions, what parts of the image would I cut to make it look like this still, but without the entire picture?
3, like the left-hand gradient would be repeating on the right, but then the button cross-section is just a button.
Okay, yeah, so you mean like this part, and then this middle part,
Yeah.
and then this left part. Yeah, so that's what you do. Alright. So you can just cut this up into 3 pieces. Does everyone understand that?
Why do you need to do that? Why can't you just make a button image of like 100 or what is it, like 500 pixels? Because it's easy, right? In Photoshop, I can just make a button image that's 500 pixels, make it a background image, and put some text in front of it. Why do I need to cut it up into 3 pieces? And then from the back, I'm looking at you. I'm judging you. Just kidding, I'm not judging you. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, it's faster in the side variance.
What?
The sides vary.
Oh, exactly. So if you see that thing that says dynamic size, if you have one image that's like 500 pixels, obviously it is not a dynamic size. So the reason you're cutting up the middle image, the middle part is because you can repeat it with CSS. So it looks like the button's longer and there's no interrupts or anything. But if you see the side parts, like you can't repeat those. Like there's no way you can repeat those, so you need to have those as individual images. Does that make sense?
So if I wanted to make this button long, if this wasn't button, but it was like enter this website or something like that, it would be really long. And if you just had a fixed size, it would like go on, but the button would end here for something weird.
So if you actually wanted your text inside to be longer, and you had the middle section just repeat itself, then it would magically stretch to fit any content you put inside of it, and still look like a regular button. And it also saves bandwidth. So it's. Oh, just kidding. He's gonna go over it next.
So we're gonna exploit the repetition in images. Like, do you guys notice any repetition in this middle part? Because basically, this middle part is basically just like 1 pixel slice, but it's just repeated throughout the entire thing. So why would I send this entire picture if I could just send a 1 pixel slice like this, right? So what we do in CSS is basically we have this picture, we load this picture, and then we make this a background. We make this a background for maybe like a span element, and then we make this a background for a span element, and we just make a 1 pixel a repeating background across this entire thing. So it'll just, however long this text is, it'll just increase with the size of the button. Does everybody get that? All right. And so that's the result of how I would slice it up.
It's literally 1 pixel because you don't need anything else. If you have like a 2 pixel thing, you're just wasting space because you already have all the information you need in that 1 pixel. There's only a vertical gradient.
Okay. And so, just technical details, CSS background repeat, this is how you use it. You say CSS background dash repeat, and then you give it a value, and then these are the 4 values that you can give it. Repeat, repeat X, repeat Y, and no repeat. And so, this is repeat X. What it does is it's gonna, if we take this as something, the orange part is some container, what repeat X is gonna do is it's gonna repeat across the X axis. And repeat Y is gonna repeat across the Y axis. Okay? And repeat is just gonna repeat everywhere. But what does background repeat, no repeat look like? Free candy. Come on. Free candy.
No repeat would just be 1 image.
Yeah, it would just be 1 picture. It wouldn't repeat at all.
So it doesn't repeat. So typically what you do for repeat is when you have a background image, or when you want to have a background that has some texture. For example, on my website, I have like kind of a papery texture. Instead of loading like a 1,000 by 1,000 kind of picture, I have this tile, and it basically like is, I don't know what you call it. It's tileable, which means that it's a perfect tile. Like when you tile it, it doesn't look like it ends or anything. So that you would use background repeat to kind of tile a smaller image multiple times to make it look like it's a big texture. And that helps you save bandwidth too, since you're not sending like 1,000 by 1,000 picture across the internet.
Any other questions?
Okay. Wait, no, you. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
I agree.
And this is how we save in Photoshop. There's a function in Photoshop called Save for Web and Devices, which basically optimizes your pictures that you save for the web, and it kind of compresses it so you're not sending in much data, and you can also choose special options in that. So you'll go over this in lab. And one of the most important features of Save for Web is there's an option called PNG24, and what PNG it basically means 24-bit, and it basically is a higher quality of PNG, and for transparency for PNG, it's just a lot higher quality, and you should be using this. The lab will go over this one. Okay. So there's basically 3 big image types. There's JPEG, GIF, and PNG. And GIF is really small. So these are for things that maybe like 1 pixel, or not 1 pixel, but more like things that have really low amount of colors. Like definitely not a photo. Definitely not anything that you created in Photoshop. Maybe stuff that, I don't know, just a single color, like an icon. That's what you want in a GIF. PNG is the largest size. JPEG is medium size. It's pretty good for things like photos. It has no transparency, so you don't want to use it for. You usually don't want to use it for things like backgrounds, and it's pretty good quality, and it's pretty small. PNG is probably the largest size, and it's probably the best quality, and it also supports transparency. So there's a trade-off here between these 3. It depends on how high quality picture you want, and whether you want to support transparency or not. So you can choose between these 3. Are there any questions?
So what does supporting transparency do first?
We'll get into that. So transparency. Transparency. Basically, what transparency is it's okay. Transparency is it kind of blends. It makes your picture blend in with the background. Okay, so these are 3 examples. This is PNG. This is GIF. This is JPEG. Okay, on a white. This is the picture we're looking at. This is a black checkerboard with some highlights around it and with some shadows around it, and it's on a white background. So on a white background, they look close to exactly the same, right? But once we get it on like a gray background, you can start noticing the difference. This is gray background. The JPEG looks exactly the same because it kind of just overrides the gray background. Okay, the GIF, the transparency is not very good. The GIF kind of like hard edges, and the PNG kind of smoothly blends in with the gray background. And we can see this even more, in more emphasis down here. You can see that this is the difference between transparency. Okay, for GIF, this is JPEG, GIF, PNG. Okay, so PNG is really good with transparency, and JPEG just doesn't do it at all. Okay.
So in short, if you want to do transparency, use PNGs.
Are there any questions?
So in general, I think when you do images for the web, you want to. I use PNG for everything. If you've ever made a logo and saved it as a JPEG, you might have noticed that there's like little specks of like weird stuff around like the letters or something. It's because JPEG compresses a lot, so it's not as high quality. But PNG I found is always like perfect, and it has transparency. So I always use PNGs, and you should probably use PNGs for this lab or this class as well.
Honestly, the difference between the size of PNG and JPEG is not very large, so when in doubt, just use PNG. Alright, so reassembling our images. So basically, remember from the button example, we broke our image into a left portion, a middle 1 pixel portion that repeats, and a right portion. And now we want to basically make it work. It's HTML. So we break it into divs. We break it into divs or spans that kind of hold these as background images. And you guys should know how to do this already. We're just going to go over it. So we're going to make this a span. Okay, we're going to make this left-hand side a span. We're going to make this middle side, this middle place a span. A span, and this left side a span as well. And then this label is going to be inside this middle part. All right. So someone tell me how to do that.
Does anyone have any questions about what we're trying to do? This is like really, really tricky. Like I hate doing this kind of stuff. I usually mess it up as well. So.
Does anybody know what this is trying to do?
So are we gonna have to just repeat the middle span a bunch of times then? Or?
No, you don't repeat the middle span. You use the back. You make the middle span this large, or you don't actually give it a width because spans are inline, so it'll stretch with this inside text, right? So what we're gonna do, we're gonna do is we're gonna give it a background image and then just set its repeat to repeat x across the middle. Okay.
It's magical.
And so this is the HTML. We're just gonna make an A element and we're gonna put 3 span classes: span, middle, span left, span middle, span right. Okay. Everyone understand this? The CSS for this button is going to be basically, notice the fact that we're going to give each of these a background image. This left part is going to have the background image of our left PNG. This middle part is going to have the background image of our middle PNG, which is and background repeat x. So it's going to repeat across the x-axis, and however large this button is going to be, it's going to expand with it. Okay. And then the right part is going to have a background image of the right. Are there any questions? Yeah.
How do you generate the space between the red part and blue part?
Red part and what?
It's adding.
Yeah, this is generated by adding 0 pixels, 80 pixels. So this is just going to say there's 80 pixels left and right of this. Yeah.
Where does the text button actually go? I don't see where you put that in. Is it HTML?
It's in HTML. So
I don't see it. Oh, okay, I see it now.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Why does it say A, span display block? Isn't the span supposed to be?
Oh yeah. Okay. So what we need to do here is we actually need to specify a width. And remember, for span elements, we can't specify widths for inline elements. So we have to specify it as a block in order to give it a width and a height. Because because if we didn't give it a block and there was just no text inside these elements, this would actually be a zero pixels. This would just be invisible, right? So we need to make it a block so that it has a height and width without anything inside.
Okay. Why does it then display inline rather than like on top of each other stacked like
Yeah.
block?
So this is because of float left, and that's my next slide.
Okay.
So notice that there's a float left here for spans. We'll go with the next one. Any other questions? First, we're going to go over display, actually. So display you can basically specify display block inline for any of your elements. So you can say that the span is blocked or like a div is, shouldn't say div is inline, but anyway. But you can also say inline block, which actually kind of circumvents your problem of having block elements next to each other. Because what inline block will do is that it'll actually stack instead of having the default behavior of block elements be top down, it'll be left right. But you shouldn't use this because this is actually not supported in IE6 and it's really inconsistent, so it's not compatible. But you should just kind of know about it since eventually people will start using it. So floats, the main layout, the main reason why we use floats is we basically put things side by side. We put block elements side by side, and what it does is that if we have a floated object, actually I shouldn't draw this, but if we have a floated object, it'll just keep. You can specify float left or right, and if you float an object, it'll just keep moving in that direction you said, left or right, until it encounters another floated object or another container's boundaries. Okay. So this kind of, if you do this on a div, if you do this on a div, this is a div with oh, you see the source. This red block is a div, and so it's a block element, and it floats left. And this blue block is also a div block element, and it floats left. And basically, what this does is the red element will keep searching to its left until it hits the boundaries of an object, and this boundary is the body. This blue element will keep searching left until it hits another block element, hits another element or its boundaries, which is this floated red object. And so this is how you kind of emulate the stacking behavior of div elements. Are there any questions? This is really tricky.
If you guys have been doing the extra for experts, this is basically the answer for the last two extra for experts. Yeah, question.
So that was float left, but then was there a specification before that to that was position relative, or where does that go? Because you need to specify position relative, right? Is that what
You
you
don't
said
need,
on
this is it has nothing to do with positioning, so you don't need any positioning on this.
Or it said on the slide that I needed something like relative or